So today we're going to talk about what organizations get wrong with transformation. Now, this isn't to say that organizations are intentionally doing these actions or lack of action that impacts employees around change and transformation, but this is something that is often unintentional due to how transformation is traditionally approached. So when transformation is communicated, it is spoken in a way that it demands for employees to adopt to it. The challenge of what organizations are getting wrong is that it's delegated how they are to determine their own relevancy. So now you are having employees that are operating in survival mode. They're getting these traditionally taught relevance, which speaks to the career, how to stay relevant in the age of AI, how to stay relevant in change and transformation, and it leads them to have to figure it out themselves. But if you are an organization that wants to create sustainable value, which is the question that needs to be asked, how do we create sustainable value? The question that's asked right now is, what do we need to do transformation, but not how do we sustain that transformation, and from a value standpoint, or a way that we can report it and that is bringing a continuous improvement or customer advantage, so or even competitive advantage rather. So we want to change how we're having questions when it gets to transformation in this day and time, especially with technology ever changing. We want to also ask, how do we create sustainable value that supports this transformation that we are speaking to? And the challenge, or the gap exists in what is assumed to be the responsibility of the employees, even up to the senior leadership level. It is assumed that they are going to learn how to, or have awareness of how they're still relevant in the change. And so that is the biggest thing. Relevant is left in it puts employees into a survival mode and how they're approaching it, because now they're being taught to expand their skills, they're being taught to get familiar with technologies, they're even taught to volunteer into project roles instead of giving those opportunities where they can see how their current skills, their current expertise, how can they expand within the current workplace, within their skills and their strengths. So if they are trying to see how relevant they are, they will only determine their relevancy based on their individual role. They will only base it on their individual role. So they'll see, how am I personally relevant? Will this role survive in transformation? And when employees are not given those tools to learn how they're relevant, or the clarity to understand how to leverage their current strengths towards a transformation, they will essentially weed themselves out of being relevant from a role standpoint, which is why you might see behavioral responses of people not being as engaged, or disconnected. The biggest assumption is saying that employees are resistant to change, and is often an indicator that they are not given the tools or have the clarity to understand how their role is relevant. And when I speak of role, of how they personally can expand, how are we leveraging these roles to drive improvement versus roles are trying to stick specific to their role from a job description standpoint. So the 3 stages that I often speak of is, how can people discover their relevance, how do they expand their relevance, and how do they multiply it? So the ways that they are multiplying it is on an organizational level. So as an organization, how are you putting in the effort to allow roles to discover how to leverage their strengths, how to leverage. So one of the things that I like speaking on is, how do they leverage their strengths? How do they understand role clarity? Meaning, as changes are happening, here are some ways that we can improve it leveraging these skills. What are some ways that they would like to be expanded within the current workforce, versus feeling that they need to add skills to go to another location? Talent shortage is one of the biggest things of talent, with there being a shortage long term of not being able to be equipped or have the skills for people to leverage what technologies you're using and how they're changing. Well, you have the strengths right in front of right within your ecosystem. So how are you developing them to expand on that? And then emotional intelligence as well. So when they're introduced with change at an executive level, they do not have visibility that you are literally trying to make sure that the organization is staying relevant in the market, staying competitive in the market, staying at the top, and delivering on customer value. So as these changes and demands are happening, there are organizations within the market who are moving just as fast as you are. What they do not understand is having the from an emotional intelligence standpoint, the ability to not feel that the change is happening to them, but it's happening for the company to further reach or be more effective in how they're reaching the goal and transformation. So then it removes them from the factor of feeling like it's a personal dig, but it's also a personal opportunity for them to be expanded, for them to apply critical thinking skills, especially with critical problem solving. All technology needs to have the basis of principles of continuous improvement, so people won't just use them at a tactical level. They'll leverage technology for strategic objectives and how to improve upon that. So we have other areas as well that I'll speak about in other videos, but I wanted to speak about the approach that organizations are taking that is that they have wrong, and that's just delegating the relevancy of how roles are important from frontline all the way up to senior management. And the other areas that I wanted to speak to is, people they won't naturally see their relevance in a workplace that does not show them how they are relevant. And when this happens, you do define it. That means that they're left to define it for themselves. So if individuals are left to define their relevance for themselves, then they will feel even more disconnected to the overall vision, because now they're trying to figure out something that essentially you want them to be a part of. But if it's not approached that way, then how your systems are or how you're currently designed as an organization, it is designed perfectly to get the responses that you are receiving from employees. And that is the preface of what organizations are getting wrong, is how are they also adding relevancy at an individual standpoint. How are they ensuring relevancy from a collective, meaning how teams are working together and across different functions, and then at an organizational level, and that is making enterprise-minded decisions where people are able to connect their work to the outcomes, as well as improve systems and build clarity. So this is something that we speak to. And the biggest importance is for you to understand, as you are approaching transformation or going through a current strategic initiative, how are you ensuring relevancy that leverages in those critical capabilities that are needed to lower those barriers at each different level. So that's the message that I have for you today.